but we also want to make sure we make this interactive because we know it's post-lunch. So please think of some questions, and we'll be coming to you in about 20 minutes for those questions, which we'd be happy to take. So Steward, first of all, welcome, and thank you for doing this. Nestle has been a very significant partner of ours and is now over 110 million fans globally. Tell me a little bit about you as a person. Are you on Facebook?
Yes, and have been for 7 years now. I think it's very interesting when I see those charts of Facebook and as you're going through the billion up. I was there in the first 10 million, which I don't know if that makes me an early adopter, but it was kind of very much down at the bottom end of the curve that barely registers. So this dates back to 2006 when I was in India. I was introduced to it. We talk a lot about word of mouth and so on. It was a friend, best friend of my wife, who has cousins in the States. She connected up with them. She's in Switzerland. She connected up with us in India, and you understand how Facebook starts to connect people across the world. So 7 years and counting.
And has your experience as a user influenced what you've done from a marketing perspective?
Oh yes, definitely. I think from the early point, and certainly the journey, the evolution as Facebook has evolved, it was very clear the opportunities to engage with consumers from an early stage. And I returned to, I was in India in 2006. I returned to Switzerland in 2009 to take up my current role. And it was the combination of two things. One, my brand, KitKat, is, I'm sure many people know the KitKat brand, is about breaks. And we talk about have a break and a KitKat, and the fundamental fact is people are taking breaks online. So from a brand standpoint, it was critical that we were present. At the same time, consumers and people are spending time there. They're spending time there as friends in the first instance, but they're a place where people are. And they're also looking to be entertained, whether it be by what their friends are up to, or what brands can also provide. And I think Maeve had a really nice example this morning with the Coke example there this morning of the activity that they did in Antwerp. So I think that sense of being able to engage and entertain with consumers, Facebook's a great place for it to happen.
So when you think about the art and science of the brand, as someone that leads the brand globally, you have to balance those two things. Digital has been seen as a clear driver of direct response. Talk to me a little bit about how you thought about it from a branding perspective.
I think at the start point, it's been about building an opportunity to build the equity of the brand. And I know this is about retail section and so on, but the start point is, do you have an engagement with your consumers? And I think as a place where consumers can engage, can enjoy the brand, and I'm very fortunate I work in a brand that has a very lively personality and has a sense of humour woven into the personality of the brand. So I think that ability to provide entertainment and engaging content for consumers was really a key trigger point that allowed us to amplify what we do in our mainstream sort of commercial television spaces, for example, press or radio. So I think it's been very much around how we look to evolve in the first place, the equity building of the brand. That's the start point.
So in 2012, you made a pretty significant shift. You made Facebook sort of not a side hobby. It was very core and central to your marketing campaign. And you actually went out and did a global pitch for the business to actually think about it in a different way. Can you talk about how that transition occurred and how you went from thinking Facebook was initially about a page and fans to actually being a core part of your media strategy?
I think there's probably two steps to it, Carolyn. I think it actually probably started in 2009, even before we really launched big in 2010, when we'd identified that when we wanted to be very active in the digital space, we made an active choice to make Facebook our core pillar. There's a big ecosystem. Everybody talks about the ecosystem. We made a very strategic choice to focus on doing one thing and do one thing really well. And we wanted it to be Facebook. So we unashamedly dedicated ourselves over the first couple of years to what we were doing in the digital space, very much through Facebook, which has delivered us a lot of very, very positive benefits. Both in an understanding of how the digital space works, but in terms of building a capability within the organisation, which we didn't have any experience in, nobody had. Going predating that. Then I think in 2012 it was really then about saying how do you look to accelerate and how do you look to amplify what you're doing as you build up the capability, because when you're running a global brand as I do, it's not only about what you do globally but what's happening in the markets locally, and the ability to knit those two things together is really critical, and I think that's where we look to sort of accelerate as we come into 2012.
So there's lots of brand managers that see the consumer behavior changing. We just went through how it's changing from a retail perspective. But sometimes it takes courage to actually say we're going to do things differently. We're going to make a bet. We're going to move faster than we have in the past. How do you do that in a company the size of Nestle, which is very decentralized? How have you done that?
It's very decentralized, it's very true. And we've also, like most big multinationals, we have playbooks and rules and a lot of how-to sort of templates that get given to you. The challenge that the whole digital space, and in particular the social media environment has thrown us is there have been no playbooks. And we've been learning as we've been going. And which has been, on the one sense, tremendously stimulating on a purely personal level. Because, from when you come into any big organisation, and I'm sure most of us understand this, somebody is giving you something that tells you how to do it. And here there hasn't been, and we've been learning as we've been going, and I think that's been one of the most stimulating things that's been happening. I think at the same time, we've been learning together with the markets. We had an active position, which is we want to run a global page, but for those markets that want to run an active local page, we encouraged them to do it, and we said it was kind of a sense of let's hold hands, jump in the pool and start swimming together. And the sharing of the learning has been one of the critical things that's led us to accelerate and develop the strong position we have today.
So arguably that's a different quality of leadership that's needed and a different approach to being really comfortable in a changing environment. How have you found the ability to actually recruit and nurture your teams around the world so that they feel really comfortable in doing things differently?
That's been a challenge. I think, or it's been a challenge with some. I think some people jump at it naturally. It's like anything. You've always got the early adopters who really want to get in and try. You've got some who are not sure and wanting somebody to show them a way, and you've got the skeptics who will always be there. I think the fact that we decided we wanted to actively take a lead in doing this helped people say, well, look, if we have a role to play as the centre of any organisation, saying, well, if they're doing it, maybe this is something that I want to look at too. So it was part a leadership role and partly a sort of an encouraging type role. But in the one sense, it's probably a little bit like kings fighting battles 700 years ago. You were in the middle of the fight. It's not like today when generals sit at the back and direct. We were in the middle of it and taking the hits and the blows as well as taking the good things that were happening. So I think that learning curve has been instrumental, but it's also been instrumental in allowing us to engage with people who were not sure. Because you got the questions, look, hang on a second, I've got a limited budget, how much should I put here? And sometimes it was difficult in the early days to say, well, look, where's the exact value of this? But sometimes you have to say to people, doesn't it feel right? And it's that gut feel element that says, well, if you've got a couple of million people engaging with you of their own free will, doesn't that tell you something? And okay, I can't show you a pounds and pence return on this investment that you're going to want to make, but you probably want to do it. And I think it's been that curve that we've been going through. And gradually, the story takes its own curve. And from a brand perspective, we had a record year last year, of which I'm sure this has been part of.
Do you think we've proven to you that we work?
I think we've got some numbers behind it now. So between some examples from both emerging markets and developed markets, between what we've done, we've got case studies. Mike, who works with us, has got case studies from the UK, from Brazil, where we can put some hard numbers against. Here's where the value has been added by leveraging Facebook as part of the mix. And that's the critical thing, it's part of, it's not the only thing we're going to do, but that Facebook can add value. For me, that's quite clear. The only thing that we have to learn now is what's the right granularity of engagement to have at the right time for the right activity in the right country. And that's a country-by-country experience that markets will also learn. But for me, it's already proven.
So last October, you took advantage of a major moment in culture with Felix Baumgartner.
Yes.
And on October 13th, you sent a KitKat to space. Tell us a little bit about how the idea came to you from JWT and how quickly you had to turn it around.
So for those who don't know, JWT is our advertising agency, part of the WPP group, and a lot of people were still very conscious of what Red Bull were doing with Felix, I guess, back in that week. The interesting part of the story, and for me as a brand owner, was, because my brand's about brakes, so we were watching with interest, basically what's happening with Felix. But he was originally due to jump on the Tuesday, and of course there was bad weather. And nobody wants to jump from 37 kilometres up if you're going to jump into a thunderstorm. I think that's a very bad idea if Felix knew it. So poor Felix is sat on his sofa. Wednesday rolls by, rolls into Thursday, and the advertising agency sent us this image of a Felix-type character sitting in his spacesuit watching the television with a little strapline saying, Felix, it might be a while, have a break. Nice little bit of equity building, nice bit of fun, something puts a smile on your face, which was great, got a really nice bit of engagement. And then they came back to us, they saw the high level of engagement this comment got, and they came back to us the following morning with an idea which says, listen, we could put a KitKat in a weather balloon and send it up into space to build on this whole thought. My only question to them was, what's the link with KitKat? They said, break from gravity. Fine, I'm in. If we've got break equity built in, off we go. And the challenge and the key bit for us, I think, within this particular story, Carolyn, was they sent the mail in to us at 11:30. It was seen by Tamara, who works for me, at 11:50. She pinged it on to me. I saw it at 12:10. We said, do it. And literally turning it around in 40 minutes, and the agency sending the idea through to us saying yes. And then within 24 hours, it was up, filmed, and then put on Facebook. So the challenge that sets out for brand owners is the ability to respond very quickly to the agency in terms of being able to convert an idea. Got huge engagement, huge pickup, we got some fantastic earned media as a consequence of what we did. But the ability, this is where Facebook provides a platform that never existed prior to the world of social media coming along. We couldn't have done that 10 years ago, we couldn't have done it 5 years ago. But we can do it today. And the ability to connect up your brand in almost real time with a real event in a way that's going to provide consumers with a smile, it was perfect and a huge success for us.
Now you call it Nestle moment marketing. Some of the agencies are now building real-time optimization capabilities so that the notion of planning months or even 18 months ahead and doing a nice neat media plan, setting all that money aside and saying, okay, we're ready to go. Very different process from getting an email at 11:30, making a decision at 12:10, and really seizing the moment in the social space. Where are you on that journey to actually be that nimble where you can move that quickly?
It's an active part of what we're having to do now, Carolyn, is to put money aside in a pot which is there for moment marketing, as we call it. We're not ambush marketing as some brands do. We're about enhancing the moment that's happening. And that's a little bit difficult for the finance guys to get their heads around, because they like to know that this money will go with this promotion that will return this much, and that's the plan for the year. So getting them to actually buy into the fact that, no, we need to put money aside so that we can respond to this occasion. If Felix had jumped on the Tuesday, there was no story for us. He was delayed and we were there and we were able to react and do something with it. And the ability to be tuned into the horizon, picking up what the potential opportunities may be, but then sometimes you never know when something's going to pop out. But that shift is a tough one, because we do live in a world where everybody likes to know that, and rightly so, that every pound, dollar, and euro will be well invested. And sometimes that's a tough one to try and manage. It's an ongoing battle.
So you have JWT, you have Mindshare as your global media agency. Talk to me a little bit about how you've gotten the agencies and your team to be totally in sync with the new direction that you want to take, which is much more about moment marketing and being more opportunistic and nimble. How have you worked closely with the agency partners to get there?
I think it's not just the agency partners. This is the interesting bit. Maybe if I could just build on the thought, because we also have yourselves as a partner. Google as a partner, we have Buddy Media, Salesforce as a partner in terms of helping us connect all the things up. And from a strategic, there's two levels to it. There's a strategic standpoint, we had a meeting last November where we were sort of strategically saying, this is where we want to go to. We need to be able to do these things more frequently, therefore we have to budget for it, we have to plan for it. And then when it comes to the execution, again, it's a learning curve we're going through, because that responsiveness that you need your agency account team, your agency creative team, to be scanning the horizon, looking for the opportunities, and saying, let's go with that one. And then that happens not only at a global level, but you need to be encouraging markets at a local level to do it. So the Felix example was something we did at the global level, but that was great because it was a global story. There may be something that's happening in Australia that may be great for them, or in Brazil, or in Russia, or in wherever. And that the local teams can also have that degree of responsiveness. But again, this comes down to us taking a lead and being able to show that what can happen. and the response that you can get when you do it. And the incremental value is huge. And you just got to be ready and tuned in, and it demands an awareness of what's going on, basically.
So one of the things that I hear when I speak to you and your colleagues at Nestle and frankly many of the other FMCGs is about the next billion consumers. So we're very focused on what we had in the growth in the developed markets, but really the future, and even for Facebook's perspective, our next billion is likely going to be from the emerging markets. Do you have very different strategies for the developed markets and emerging, and how do you think about that?
I think that's a good question. I think I'm very close to the emerging markets because I worked in India before I came back to the centre. I've worked in the UK, I've done developed, I've done a global channel job. I've been fortunate in my career to see different angles on what goes on. I think the part of it is picking up from the emerging markets is the people in those markets, because I think one of the key things on our side in those markets being tuned into those needs. I think one of the things that we've done on our brand, and I just talk purely from my experience, is move from having a more globally led strategy to having a more locally led execution. And that responsiveness in what we can do, which is creating flexibility, creating engagement for the marketing teams locally. So they're not just saying, okay, what are the guys in Vevey by the lake thinking about doing? It's what can I do? And there's a shift that's going on, because your consumer in Bangalore may be somewhat different. He might be a 21-year-old tech student. Is going to be very different from a 35-year-old married, guy in Toronto, for example, married to a big mortgage. So that awareness of the consumer. But I think the things that we see quite clearly are those markets that are best tuned into that consumer are the ones that are able to respond and reflect the brand equities and the brand essence in a way which that consumer can respond to. So I think it's a combination of us continuing to lead, as well as the markets really being extremely responsive to the local. And the synergy between the two is what makes 2 and 2 equal 6 or 16 or 66.
So we've been talking, I've been on many stages where we've said it's the year of mobile for at least 10 years. And now sitting at Facebook, we clearly see the shift to mobile. We now call ourselves a mobile company. We don't even refer to ourselves as a desktop company anymore. Clearly, most of the people in the emerging markets are only ever going to see the internet through the eyes of a feature phone or smartphone. How are you now thinking about it, Nestle, and with your team, building the capabilities? Because mobile arguably will be as important as the TV from a mass media perspective in those markets. How are you thinking about that?
It's not just thinking about it, it's about how do we action it, because it's a live reality. And I think the first thing, even at a very simple level, if I take it down to a simple level, traditionally media campaigns, when you're dealing with the agency, they're thinking about the big TV and what does the outdoor look like and everything that's glamorous and sexy. Whereas one of the things we are asking them to do when they're coming up with our Facebook calendar and what are the posts we're going to make, is when they send it through in small. So we can look at it in the size of what it's going to appear on somebody's phone. And visually, does it work? At a simplest level like that, does it actually work when it comes down to small? Because you can have something on a fantastic screen like that and everyone goes, oh, wow. But does it actually have the impact when it's on that kind of screen? So the first thing is making sure that when your agency is working ideas up, that they're actually delivering it in a format that the consumer will see it in. So you don't lose anything in translation. Because if it works in that to start with, it's a lot easier to take it up the way than it is necessarily to bring it down. So it actually becomes a lead sort of medium for us in terms of how does some of our work come to life.
That's fascinating. No one's allowed to go into Mark's office now, but not that he has an office, he has a conference room. No one's allowed to walk in with any demo of anything on Facebook unless it's actually on the mobile device. He doesn't want to see it on any larger screen. So similar from a culture perspective. Let's talk about the content on Facebook, because we sometimes can be difficult and challenging to work with. We have lots of different names.
Michael testifies, sorry.
Lots of different names for our products, and yet when you boil Facebook down to its simplistic version, it's about targeted reach and engagement. A lot of people, really engaged audience. How have you thought about getting your content strategy on Facebook and have it really be the voice of the brand?
I think on the one hand, you've got to ask your agency to step back from big campaigns in isolation. Big campaigns are important because TV still is a main medium, and even in emerging markets, still a very key way to get to consumers. But they work for a window of time. But the thing that the social media platforms like Facebook give you that ability to be there day in, day out. And for my brand, it's really critical because breaks are taken day in, day out. So being there every day is really quite key. And I think really then it's a function of tasking them to be thinking about it in those two contexts. One is what's the big campaign look like, but two is what's the daily conversation? And what's your conversation strategy? And how are we engaging with people? And what's the mix of content that we want to put out there? And again, from our side, people just like talking about product. Before we even launched, we did a good 6 months of just listening to what people were talking about on our brand. Because like many brands the first KitKat pages were created by fans. They weren't created by us. Most brands were like that. And that ability to listen and to continue to listen is really quite key because fans will often tell you, what the good topics are. So being tuned into them, it might sound kind of quite simple. And the reality is sometimes it is. You've just got to make sure you do it and keep it that way and not allow too many layers of complexity to kick in. But as long as you can deliver something which is engaging and everyday and relatable, then you have reasons why people will engage and people will like and people will share and people will comment. And as I say, for me, that's what's building my brand equity. And for me, as a brand owner in my category in confectionery is a repertoire play. It's relatively low loyalty. Everyone in this room will have probably an average of 5 chocolate brands that they will move through at different points as an average. So for us, it's not about loyalty. A lot of the time for us, it's about top of mind and being engaged. And when the consumer is in front of that kiosk or that shop and making that decision, that KitKat resides with them in their head.
So let's talk about paid, owned, and earned. A lot of people, I think, even in the beginning when they worked on Facebook, it was all about how much actually, how things can go viral. How can I benefit from earned media? You've now demonstrated several of our examples, the UK, Brazil, and even with Felix, that there is a strong correlation between paid and earned. How are you thinking about that?
It's really in a decentralized organization like ours, it's a key message for the markets and the markets to be holding that they need to be striking the right balance of the investment. And I think that's the learning curve that we started really last year and getting into this year and going forward is finding the right way to strike that right balance. And in part it will depend upon the campaign that the agency is coming up with. But I firmly believe that it's a capability building exercise within the markets themselves and that they are planning for it because we've seen and we're able to share on our quarterly comms calls with the markets who have done simple things but really quite effectively in terms of the paid really helps amplify. It's no big surprise. But to be able just to showcase it and get people to factor it into their thinking and the whole sort of social media space is it's not free. It requires an investment, but it's an investment that will give you a return. And then you've just got to build it in alongside of how much you put behind this, how much you put behind your TV, how much you put behind your press, and so on. But then it's an integral channel. I think nobody debates that anymore. It's just what's the right balance for your market and your consumer.
That's great. Okay, we have about 6.5 minutes left, so I wanted to open it up to the audience. I think we have microphones. Does anybody have any questions for either Steward or myself? Quiet group.
There wasn't this opportunity this morning, so grab it now. There may not be. Okay, we've got a question down the front. There's a microphone coming to you. Just so everybody can hear.
Hi, Steve Dallas from Unicom. You talked about having some numbers behind the success, that you start to quantify the success of Facebook. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you're measuring there, what the KPIs are, and what sort of numbers you're seeing.
At the simplest level, I'll give you 2 examples. One from the UK, let's take a developed market, one from an emerging market in Brazil. One in an emerging market, we were looking at the straightforward return on investment on the impact of the pound spent in Facebook versus the pound spent on TV, for example, or one or two of the other media channels. And with the quantum that we'd invested on Facebook, within the UK example, we found that it had a 34% sort of higher return than the pound spent on TV, for example, in that particular case study. So I think that acceleration in terms of what we're looking for in terms of the return on that investment. In Brazil, it was a different scenario. The brand is at a younger stage, and it's about awareness and top of mind. And we were able to incrementally accelerate the top of mind scores for the brand basis, the investments that were being made, as well as, of course, driving a whole lot more fans into the brand on the Facebook page. So it depends on the country, which is a little bit back to Carolyn's question about developed versus emerging markets. They're both really important. Maybe one is more about return on investment versus the other one, which is more still about engagement. But in either scenario, we have case studies that have actually been able, we can put a hard number against it, recirculate it within our community and say, this works, you should be thinking about this, and you should be planning this with your media planners.
So just to be clear, in the first instance, it was an ROI based on sales.
Yes.
Sales like that.
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? No? Okay, then I'll keep asking questions.
Oh, there's one in the corner.
Okay.
Actually, back in 2009 or 2010, like the worst case scenario happened to you guys with the Greenpeace versus KitKat row.
Thanks for reminding me about that.
Yeah, of course. What did you learn from that? So the stories that Greenpeace kind of orchestrated an attack on the Facebook page of KitKat, and you were one of the first major brands to be kind of attacked, and the initial reaction was not very good. Then what did you learn, and what has changed since in your approach to social media? What have you learned from this experience?
Okay, thank you. For those who weren't aware, we were Nestle corporately was attacked by Greenpeace on a palm oil issue, and their point of leverage was the KitKat brand. They specifically focused on a brand. They didn't attack the organisation at a total level. They focused on the brand. I think it threw up learnings at two levels: one on a brand level, but one particularly on a corporate level, which predates Pete Blackshaw and Pete's arrival. And I think one of the things that's happened since Pete's arrival is that at a simplest level, the awareness of how to engage at a corporate level. The issue was not how we were responding as a brand, it was how we were responding at a corporate, at a Nestle level, which is where some of the issues arose. And I think we've made huge strides in terms of the capability at a corporate level. And you've got layers within an organisation between people who are maybe slightly younger, who work on brands, who are more attuned to how the world is evolving, thanks to Facebook and all the other platforms, versus at a corporate level where the organisation hadn't been touched to the same degree at that point. So I think it was a real wake-up call. I think we had to respond not only to what Greenpeace were asking us, which we have done, and we did it quite quickly, to the point where Greenpeace are a very active, positive partner. We have a positive partnership with the Forest Trust in the activity that we're taking on palm oil. So we were able to address their concerns. But it's driven us to be more proactive, I think, in that sense. At the same time as actually building a capability within the organisation. Because if you wanted a case study on how to go hurt an organisation, I think Greenpeace did it extremely well. But what it's given us, what we've been able to do, as Nestle always does, is then take up the challenge and respond. And I think we deal with it very differently today to how we dealt with it back in 2010, March 2010. I remember it well. But I think it's about, all of us are learning. So whether it's at a corporate level, whether it's as brand owners, whether it's as retailers, whether it's as consumers, we've all started to learn how to leverage this particular platform.
Stewart, in our last couple of minutes, feedback on what we could be doing better as a partner. Always risky to do in front of several of your closest friends, but
well, I think that the first point I probably would come up on it is you are a partner. I think that's the first word, is partner. I mean, you're an integral part of what we do. So I think everything stems from there. You are not somebody who doesn't sit around the table when we're sitting having planning about what are we doing in digital and comms. I go back to this planning meeting that we had last November when Mike was there alongside of Google, alongside of Salesforce, Buddy Media and so on. You're a key part of what we have to do. I think things we could do more, so then it's a question of what can we do more. I think more of the engagement, more of the time, which is resource on your side, resource on ours, which are precious on both sides. But I think the acceleration of the learning between both of us would probably be something that would stand both of us in greater stead. But that we are partners is quite clear, and we value that from our side.
Thank you. And I will just close to wrap it up and say I get to work with people all around the world that really have different approaches to how they're thinking about this new space. And Steward, it's a privilege to work with you and your team because of how forward-thinking and innovative you are. And I think precisely when you talk about the credit of Pete coming on board a few years ago with Nigel and Patrice, the amount of energy in the last few years has been totally exciting to see a company that's been around a heck of a lot longer than Facebook, not only embrace Facebook, but as you said, all of the other marketing partners in the ecosystem. So really pleasure to work with you, and thank you for joining us on stage.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, everybody.